The Marching Roundtable is proud to be an official media partner of Drum Corps International.
Thanks for coming to the Marching Roundtable YouTube channel, sharing great information to help you succeed in all the marching arts. While you're here, we hope you'll subscribe.
It was really interesting because the more we talked about vulnerability, the more we started throwing out different adjectives about, what a male is today in society, what society wants us to be, what a male wants to be. What if the male wants to be something that society doesn't want them to be, or what they see themselves as being that society doesn't see. And it got to be a pretty deep conversation. So our exercise was, let's just start throwing out adjectives to what this is. And we talked about different points in the show about how we would lay this thing out. And it's really interesting how it all came to be because, rather than movements, we called those portions of the show episodes. And rather than transitions, we built in transitions with the word glimpse. And the glimpse was taking us from one episode of a particular adjective or a particular emotion and bridge that to where we were going.
And then you see it on the flags as the show is progressing. You see the eyes, you see the shape of the eye in one flag, but by the end, it's the faces of all the performers. The last set of flags, every color guard performer, it's their face printed on the flag.
On a personal level, one of the hardest things that we do as humans is make eye contact with each other. It's really easy to pass someone on the street and not even look at them at all. And so I think that some of the level of maybe hesitation in terms of making eye contact on a human level is something that makes this show come to life a little bit. It's that uncomfortable feeling of like, these props have turned and these faces are looking at me and I feel a little bit uneasy right now. But the question internally is it because you're making eye contact with someone and it's not something we're all used to, especially with technology continuing to evolve the way that it does. We communicate more on a virtual level than we do on a human level from a day-to-day perspective. And so I think that's something that's really important to identify, that we're losing that connection from person to person by just simply making eye contact with each other.
This podcast is sponsored by FJM, Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Marching Roundtable podcast. This is Tim Hinton, the beast of the marching arts, and we're talking Cavaliers, which I love talking Cavaliers. On the line, some really smart people. David Starnes, the program coordinator, is with us. David, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great. Everybody, if you're watching this on video, which I hope you are, you will see he's got his cool cavies, like what do you call this? Like a pullover jacket?
I think it's a pullover. It's something they gave me, so I'll wear
nice. It. Everybody should have one of those. That's beautiful. Also with us tonight, Adam Sage, the artistic director. Adam, how are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
I should say good morning.
Yeah, the sun's shining.
You're calling in from Tokyo, which is so cool. Thank you for getting up for this.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And let's just go ahead. What are you doing in Tokyo?
I teach a drum corps over here as well. Yeah, I'm in my 10th year working with the Yokohama Scouts.
Awesome.
So,
well,
yeah,
that's.
They're learning their show right now, so their season starts a little bit after ours in the States. So.
Well, thank you for stopping in the middle of that. Thank you to the Scouts for letting you stop and have this conversation. And also with us tonight, choreographer Brandon Fink is with us. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so glad that you are here. We're going to be talking, everybody, about the very cool dance intensive that Brandon did with the color guard. I think it's going to be really interesting. That's going to be one of our topics. But first off, guys, congratulations. Another beautiful show, another great season. A lot of striking things about this show that, like, I think people are like leaning in and like, okay. And so I'm really interested to hear about that, sort of how this came to be. Those images on those backdrops are just so striking. So I definitely want to hear about the genesis of those, because those faces are very intense. And I would love to hear about that, of course, as part of it. David, where do you want to start as far as just sort of talking about where the show came to be?
Well, I think maybe from the beginning. And this was a very interesting process for us this year. Everybody knows we celebrated 75th anniversary last year, and we felt like we had to pay homage to the drum corps in the years, and it was kind of a best of, but without it being a best of. A lot of Easter eggs in that show last year, and this year it's more about how we want to branch out and how we want to view maybe the next 75 years. And we had several Zoom calls during the fall, but then we actually got face-to-face in Orlando with the entire design team in early December. And we started talking about what the drum corps is, who the Cavaliers are, who the Cavaliers have been to the drum corps activity after 75 years. And one of the things that we all landed upon is not only for the Cavaliers, but for the drum corps activity as a whole, the word vulnerability. And it's like where the drum corps activity is, where it was 75 years ago, and where it might be in 75 years, and how precious it is to all of us, but how quickly it can be here or be gone. And so not taking the activity or the Cavaliers for granted. And I think it was Brandon that started talking about the word vulnerability and about what that means in the life of a young man, like who they are, who's society expecting them to be. And this whole conversation, it got pretty intense. We went about 3 hours and it seemed about 10 minutes. And that's when we kind of walked away from the table and we're like, whoa, where are we going with this? So it was really interesting because the more we talked about vulnerability, the more we started throwing out different adjectives about, what a male is today in society, what society wants us to be, what a male wants to be, what if the male wants to be something that society doesn't want them to be, or what they see themselves as being that society doesn't see. And it got to be a pretty deep conversation. So our exercise was, let's just start throwing out adjectives to what this is. And we talked about different points in the show about how we would lay this thing out. And it's really interesting how it all came to be because, rather than movements, we called those portions of the show episodes. And rather than transitions, we built in transitions with the word glimpse. And the glimpse was taking us from one episode of a particular adjective or a particular emotion and bridge that to where we were going. So the show never really stops. And that's good and bad. It's great when you're on you're a judge, because I don't think we've heard the word pacing problems all year long, because it just goes. I mean, it's very horizontal, but within the constraints of a vertical grid. The bad part about that is it becomes very difficult to rehearse, because you have to literally stop in the middle of segments of the show of what was or what will be. But within this segments, this grid that we created, we just had people start listing adjectives. Let's say the first movement is about, we want it to feel constrained, and then go. And we just started listing adjectives, and it was crazy. It was the best exercise in the world. And then that moment of like, what's in between? It's a soliloquy, it's thought provoking, it's deep thoughts within an individual person. And I think we really grew together as a design team that weekend, because in an exercise to talk about vulnerability, we were the ones who were most vulnerable. And boy, it brought us together. I mean, we had not worked under the same roof up to that point. And I don't know how you guys feel, Adam and Brandon, but there was a real magic about that. And I think everything happens for a reason. And that led me to believe we're doing the right show, and the way that whole thing came together. So the title, Beneath the Armor, is really about just that. It's about all of us as human beings are vulnerable underneath that facade that we're supposed to be, or people want us to be. But there's that person inside of us that says, but I want to be this person. And it's about having the courage and the bravery to break out of that stereotype, to become the person that you yourself want to be. And I think in today's society, with this generation, they're more brave to do that than my generation ever thought about being. Their beliefs, their needs, and I think their fearlessness to speak up. And I love that about this generation. So in a nutshell, Adam and Brandon, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just going to add, because we really have developed that horizontal flow and the direction of the program. Uh, Something too, I taught the core 22 years ago, and this is not something that it wouldn't have happened 22 years ago. You were armored, you were guarded. That's how it was. And I worked with the color guard back then, and that's how they had to be. And so, it's a great thing to see. I love how Dave said it's the longevity of the activity and keeping it going and creating a project with performers that allows them to be who they are. And I thought that it was really important to us to say, what can an all male cast do? What is it? Because they're the only one. So what are they going to bring to the table that's going to make them unique? That's going to be the Cavaliers, but then also propel the drum corps moving forward. So that's been really important to us. And something that resonated for me, and I know the drum corps and performers, they're doing different exercises and reflecting on what the show means to them. But one of the members posted actually just, I don't know, not too long ago, that the show for them really connects to the idea that comes from also the core song, someday, somewhere, somehow, there's a place for us. And I just think that resonates so significantly. And then the members, are attaching and they're going on this journey as we are also now continuing to shape to make that horizontal structure and really we're in the process now of working on and developing and just really producing a few more vertical moments along the way to really anchor the whole program.
Brandon, it's very interesting the opportunity that an all-male cast would have to present this theme of vulnerability. Like, that is sort of like a special opportunity.
Oh, 100%. And I think that I love the history that Adam has and how he can kind of take a look back at where the core was 22 years ago. I've been with the core since 2019, and as I have continued to work boots on the ground, I've gotten to know the guys really well. And strength and bound movement is something they can identify with really well, but there was always a level of curiosity for them in being softer and finding more fluidity in their approach to visual responsibility. And so I think it expands that box that we may have been in for a period of time in the course history. But I think on a personal level, again, it allows them to have that self-reflection, and it allows them to have an accessibility into who they are as an individual and bring that to the field, so it becomes more personal.
And I'll add to that. One of the things we intentionally did this year was a focus on membership culture, staff culture, program culture. And this program plays right into that. It's some of the hardest working people I've ever been around in my life. Their acceptance for each other's differences, their acceptance for each other's tolerances, lifting each other up. Drum corps is hard. And when you have, 164 people on the road and it's all about that intensity every day, and then you put that into the male gender and it becomes even more intensified. Tim, this is a word that you taught me years ago when we worked together. I remember the word machismo. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And,
we did a whole show about machismo at one point.
I think so. And I just remember, it's to watch them work as a team and the reflectiveness that they have. I sat down with a core one night and I talked about it. I said, we're going to talk about being vulnerable. And I shared some very personal things about my life. And I said, and this is being vulnerable. I'm telling you things that you probably don't need to know. And I don't know why I'm even telling you this, but through our relationship together, there's a trust that we've already built. And I'm vulnerable, but you're going to accept this. And I have no fear of telling you this stuff. And so then I went through that night. I posted our adjective list on their Slack channel. And I said, after rehearsal, I want you to read this before you go to bed. And I want you to think about all these words within each of these categories and find words that you closely identify with. And then I want you to ask yourself the question, why do you identify with these words? What is about these words that that identify to your life, to an experience you've had, to a friend, to a family member, whatever that might be, and take that with you when we start that particular movement. That's your identifier. And I had a ton of guys come up after me going like, that's the most real the show has ever felt to me, because you gave me something concrete. It was not an abstract. And I think about that every time I perform that. So we're kind of getting in their heads a little bit. The downside of this is we didn't want this to be an intellectual show. I mean, it was purely led by the emotional with an aesthetic, and then the intellectual being the bottom portion. But you just never know sometimes. And the thing's flipped. Now it's become really intellectual and sophisticated at the same time. And the emotional part of it, I think, relies upon the individual and what they bring to the table. And maybe the most serious emotional piece of it is what's happening within each individual. It's pretty neat exercise that we've gone through with this.
Can you explain to me more what you mean when you talk about it's become intellectual? Like, I think I know what you mean, but like, can you give me an example maybe of how that's manifested?
Yeah, so I talk to the guys about just the triad of effect, and when we start talking about how you want to communicate, right? And I put that into layman's terms rather than the emotional, the intellectual, and the aesthetic. I just always refer to it as feel it, think it, see it. And if you can feel it, that's an emotional response. If you see it, that's that aesthetic response. And if you think it, that's that intellectual response. And I said, you have to know where you come from within that triad. Like, what hits you first when I give you the word constrained? Is that an intellectual trigger? Is that an emotional trigger? Or are you claustrophobic and there's that emotion, that visual that you have as far as that goes? So I think as the performers, especially at the level DCI is right now, if we're performing for the audiences and we're getting judged, I think that the members, the performers, have to understand what that relationship is within the evaluation process also, and know when we say communicate, that's just a buzzword. Let's feel it. Let's think it. Do they see it? And put that in terms of something that they can relate to. So I think that's really strong for them in terms of being able to identify something that they can clearly communicate.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to add to that too, from the intellectual piece, imagery. When we were working on just flag direction, costume design, all of that, the armored piece was pretty quick to come by, right? The whole uniform, the guard, we got that. It was, what does this become? So like symbolically, we felt like the eyes are sometimes, when you look into someone's eyes, the vulnerability and how that communicates and how that feels was really a piece that we could really use in costuming and imagery on the silks. I'm wondering, I know this could be edited, is this a good time, Dave, to talk about the panels?
I think it is.
I do think, because Tim, when you're asked about the intellectual, you see, I think some projects, it's not a race. Some projects are going to take that time. You have to have that time to view the artwork, view the piece. And we say, okay, like Dave was talking about the triad of effects, what's working? What can we really amp up? How do we make sure that vertical moment is also emotional and connecting? And intellectually, when we first when Markel did the designs for the panels, when they turn, the faces, I mean, they're beautiful, striking. And it's so interesting. I remember the first show in Michigan, they were bringing them on the track. Oh, that's cool. That looks great. They were the next corps performing. Oh, that looks great. And it's so interesting when you see it in context, then it started to feel like it was raising a question of why, and then you're trying to scratch your head and go, oh, why is it that face? What, or who is that face? And that was a piece that I think for us, stepping back, we realized that way differently than you're designing it on a graphic and say, oh, this looks great. So we really had to take a look at that, and thinking about that intellectual, maybe we should try something different with that, to allow not to ask that question, just to maybe hint at something that's to come by the end. So you're not having to kind of ask yourself the why just yet, but then you kind of see, oh, aha, maybe when these panels do come together or they do turn, there is this connection, or you see this color story, or you see this shape that might subtly hint towards the shape of the eye. Like the color guard costume, when they take their armor off, there is this really abstract swirl of the eye. Michael Cesario designed our guard costumes, and I thought it was really brilliant. The color palette looks great. There's a little touch of green in there, but it's really this beautiful blend of blues, and it's really striking. And we have that, really subtle hint towards the eye. Then we, stepped back and said, maybe we can do that more throughout this shedding of armor. So, you're more interested in it. And then when they come together, they might kind of create little images. And then you see it on the flags as the show is progressing. You see the eyes, you see the shape of the eye in one flag. But by the end, it's the faces of all the performers. The last set of flags, every color guard performer, it's their face printed on the flag. And so we are now we love how that became. And so now maybe this story of unguarding or shedding layers is a little subtle hint of color or shape that we're now going to embark on in the second half.
And the front side of the prop, it's Frank Gehry inspired. The architect Frank Gehry that did the Disney Concert Hall and Millennium Park in Chicago. And that's really the idea behind it, is this twisted metal that we're guarded, and almost like a broken but beautiful concept where it's twisted, but at the same time there's a beauty to that, but we're still not letting anybody in. And then the second side of the prop is obviously letting people in, with some tricks that we've got coming up down the road that some people are going to experience. So stay tuned for that.
Right. It was interesting because when we put in the last of the flags, how striking they are, how important that is, that face is the performer's face, allowed us to reflect back on, okay, maybe when these panels are turning, we need something in between to get us to the end. So without it being so obvious or so specific, that we can kind of blend something to get us to what's most important, which is the performers.
What I love that you guys are describing, and I want to make sure everybody is catching this, is every show is different, and every season is different, and every summer develops in a different way, and every drum corps develops in a different way. And I like that you're describing, like, okay, this show is, it seems to me very clearly, sort of like this work in progress that is going to happen and develop and change and grow and morph and become more interesting, and there's all these layers, and like some shows just aren't there at the first show of the season. And actually that's kind of the way drum corps is supposed to work, I think, is like, it's sort of like this growth. So I just want to make sure everybody's understanding, like, this is one of those productions, it seems to me, that is developing and growing and changing and morphing and expanding and getting more complex and adding layers. And also it strikes me, Brandon, maybe you can speak to this, like, this strikes me, if this is the process for the show, which is the way a lot of drum corps shows actually end up going, first off, there's a lot of growth that happens, and the performers have to grow into the responsibility of this kind of thing. Do you want to speak to that, Brandon? Because I feel like you guys are describing a huge responsibility for performers in what you're asking of them.
100%. I mean, pardon me. I definitely think that the creative process is an evolutionary process. If you land on the exact result from day one, you'll be really clean and it'll be really precise. But I think what we're mostly passionate about as humans is the development of art over time and how that can evolve, how your perspective changes over time as you continue to evaluate the art that you've created and what you put out there. I think it's also evaluating from the performer's perspective as we look at the macro and we start to identify how are these performers connected to specific moments within the show? What are they able to identify with most? And how can we, as the leaders of this group, kind of take a step back and evaluate for ourselves, like, if this is working, great, let's run with it. And if it's not, let's take a step back and identify the reasons why and how we can push that forward over time. I think the eye is a great example of that Adam's bringing to the table. Not only do you see it in the props in their current existence, but Mason Daphne has done a fantastic job of integrating that from a macro scale in terms of drills. So if you're looking at the show from up top, there are eyes all over the forms that we're creating, the specific moments that we're choosing to lead the eye to, and how we kind of carry that over throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things, I'll add this in because we're talking visual-based stuff, but this actually happened musically too. We got about 3 weeks into the season, and our wind arranger, Richard Salcedo, who's amazing, called me one night at about 11 o'clock at night, and he said, I think we're going a different direction, or we need to go a different direction musically. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I feel like where we need to be at the beginning of the show and what I wrote on our first go round together is in a different place. He said, I want another stab at creating a different kind of emotion for now where we are within this. And I said, okay. So the next day, wow, he sends me another version, sent it to the percussion writers. The next day, the guys got it. The day after that, we ensembled it. And that night, they put it in the drill, the same drill, completely different music. And within about a 36-hour period, we had a brand new opener. The first minute and 30 seconds of the show was completely different. And the night after that, they performed it in a show. So it's that kind of stuff that's happening.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate in making sure what you're saying is what you really intended to say. And now that the show is happening, you realize, oh, this isn't doing what I thought it would, and let me make it right, sort of. That's amazing. Yeah. Gosh, what of a genius is this man?
Well, and what he wrote was what we talked about in December. And then as the show, as we're talking about the organic process, he said, I don't think it matches like I wanted it to, or where we are now. And flipped a switch, and there it was. So amazing.
Yeah, that's so smart.
Well, that's another layer of vulnerability as a design team, is the ability to take a step back and set the ego to the side and recognize, like, hey, I took a stab at this, and what we created was good, but we know it can be better, and here's how it can. And the ability to have that autonomy and openness among your team, I think, is something that really brings us together.
100%.
Our challenge with this is the accessibility, that we want everybody to have as much knowledge about what the program is as our members and our design team is. And that's a really hard thing to do, you know, without passing out librettos to everybody, but allowing them that organic process every time they see the core, that first time they see the core, to walk away with something that was an emotional trigger or an intellectual or an aesthetic trigger for them. And this show has all that. So it's interesting the way people are, some people get confused and other people are like, I know exactly what you're doing. To listen to a panel of judges night after night after night, it's so intriguing to go, wow. And then some will go, I see what you're doing. And some are like, it took me to the end, but now I got the pathway. That's brilliant. So it's been a lot of fun, and it hits people different ways.
And I think that's the important thing too right now when we're working on the program and stepping back. So making those choices now, what we can do to take it to the next level. There's 3 weeks left. This is not a race. It's the journey that gets us to the end. And like Dave was saying, you know, yes, the audience, you know, we want them to be a part of that and to feel connected to that. And those are some things that we're, you know, as we're looking at things now, of what can we do here? What can we do at this point? That's been really great the last couple of days to allow that to come to fruition. I think that's going to be a great piece for the program moving forward the next 20 days or something.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm glad we're having this conversation, is because I want people to understand, like, they need to be willing to grow with the show and understand it and let it unfold. Like, come on, everybody, like, this is an art form. It's a process. We're watching these men like take this show and make it, like, the staff and the members, like, turn it into this something very cool. And I feel like sometimes drum corps fans can be impatient and not sort of understand or appreciate the process. And so that's why I'm happy that we're having this conversation, because listen, everybody, let's see where this thing goes, right? Let's see how where it's going to go. And I bet also, Brad, I'm going to ask you this. I'm imagining that the members are also informing you on where the show should go. Like they're bringing their own self and performance and emotions to it. And I'm assuming that also is influencing the decisions you're making about what to do.
Well, 100%. I mean, the passion that these performers have for visual responsibility, I think, is more than I've experienced in the past, and they are not hesitant to come to me and say, hey, Brandon, I have this special skill. I can do this flip, or I can do this headstand. And so they're eager to kind of provide some of that creative inspiration as well. And I definitely leave the door open for that. My ultimate goal as a choreographer is to provide them with choreography that's accessible, that makes them feel confident in what they're doing. So it's never a matter of here's what I've given you and that's the rite of passage. I'm always looking at it through the perspective of what is going to make them feel the most confident when they walk out on the field, but also convey the message that we want thematically.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add to that too, on their Slack, which, every part of Slack there's a channel for everything. Back in the day, we didn't have anything like this. So there was a channel where one of the staff members, Chef Whipple, reached out to the drum corps. I think it was just yesterday. My time change here is a little off, but he posted videos and different things about vulnerability. And he encouraged the members to watch and, to have that experience. And then he asked them if anyone's willing to share your thoughts, what the show means to you, or how you feel as a performer working through the program. That would be great. And so now the members are actually starting to do that and to share what this means to them and their journey of drum corps, their journey of being a Cavalier, and what that means to them, and how how this is really important to them as performers, and how they communicate to the audience to make it really personal, which I think is a really great exercise. We've taught drum corps for a while. Some shows, don't really, there's not an entire need necessarily to kind of do that, or, where maybe storyline wise it might do that for you. Whereas maybe conceptually, when some things are, the art of that is being put together as we go, and there's that, experience, it's really important that the members have that as well, and how they are attached to that emotionally. So I think it's pretty cool that he did that, and I think it's great and really vulnerable for members to kind of share what this means to them, and then how to put that together. I think this is a really good point mid-season, if you will, kind of moving into the end of how that all really can take the next level.
You're asking a lot of these performers, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, because not only are you asking them to perform a world-class drum corps show, which is these days ridiculous unto itself, but you're also asking them to be vulnerable, to have this thing. I think it's great. Like, challenge them. I love that I love that you're asking this of them. And again, I want people to think like, okay, we're asking a lot of these young men, and let's let them work that out. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very interesting process that you guys are in the middle of. Now, Brandon, you guys did a very cool dance intensive, performance intensive, and from a dance point of view with the color guard. I want you to talk about what that was, and then how that has helped this season, or how it's shown itself to help the season.
Absolutely. So I come from a dance background. I actually started my professional dance career by learning dance terminology and skills in color guard, and that inspired me to follow that trajectory. And so now my goal is to bring what I've learned throughout that experience back to the marching arts. I happen to be the director of education for St. Louis Dance Theater, and I recognize the last year that the Cavaliers had this opportunity was in 2019, and they were working closely with Visceral Dance Chicago, and they did a similar summer intensive or dance intensive there. And so I kind of took that structure and continued to evolve it over time. Essentially, the entire color guard moved to St. Louis for the better part of 6 days. During that time, we located a housing site downtown St. Louis, and then we would commute to the dance studios every single day. And the plan was and executed that way. The day started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they went through technical training or technical classes focused on genres such as ballet, jazz, and contemporary. Those classes were taught by myself as well as other professional dancers that I work with as part of the company. So they were exposed to not only my voice that they're going to hear all summer, but just getting some perspective from other professionals in the community. Throughout that experience in each class, they would learn combinations, and we kind of held on to those combinations throughout the week because the end of the intensive actually culminated into a showcase for the public. So they had the opportunity to perform. The second day they were there actually happened to be the main company's spring performance called Identity. So we kind of kicked off their experience here by taking a couple of dance classes and then diving into a theater and watching a professional dance company perform on stage and get a sense for what that felt like, and hopefully inspire them to continue moving. My theory about dance is that we're all born dancers, and throughout time, that's kind of stripped away from us in a wide variety of ways. And I think the simplest way I can convey that is think about being a child, and maybe you're in elementary school and you're running down the hallway and a teacher pops out of the classroom and says, "Don't run." And that teacher is coming to you out of a place of safety, right? They want to make sure that you're not going to fall down into a brick wall and hurt yourself. But innately, running is a form of dance. It's a kinesthetic communication, if you will. And so that's kind of stripped away from us in layers over time. And so we kind of lose our sense of who we are as a dancer. So the ultimate goal of this intensive was to bring these guys into one space and reignite their passion for dance. I very much recognize as a dance educator, especially in the marching arts, that sometimes people hold on to insecurity surrounding their abilities in dance. And so this was a moment of, this is a judgment-free zone. This is an opportunity for you to dive in the deep end of a pool that maybe you haven't experienced before and soak up as much knowledge as possible. Not only did they go through technical training, and I did this to myself, Tim, but I tasked myself with choreographing a 5-minute piece on 32 guys in 5 hours. That was also part of this performance. It was a 5-minute piece. We got them on stage. I had a lighting designer in, so we lit the entire thing, much like you would find in a professional concert dance setting. So they performed that for the public, and then they also had the opportunity to perform that piece on stage as part of the MFA Summer Symposium, which I think is a really cool experience. Yeah. The piece itself was conceptually focused on what they were getting into this summer. So the piece was called Run From Me. And what I talked to them a lot about was how many times we recognize maybe not the most positive aspects of ourselves, and we run away from it, rather than look in the mirror and face yourself and really acknowledge the ways that we can grow as individuals. Pun intended, man in the mirror, if you will. So outside of that, we did have some fun. So every day they would finish their day at 3:30 p.m. Many of them did not have the opportunity to visit St. Louis prior to this, so it was their first visit. So I let them explore different neighborhoods, and they got to go out and enjoy restaurants. And I think what the importance behind that was really surrounding creating that community and that unity among the color guard. So when they arrived at spring training, they were already familiar with each other. They had already started to form relationships with each other. And so it just set that trajectory into motion. And I think that that's carried over into their production this summer. When I look at that color guard, it's not often you find 40 guys on a field that can dance that way.
Right.
I vividly remember the artistic director of St. Louis Dance Theater. His name's Kervin Douthit Boyd. He danced for Alvin Ailey American Dance Company for many, many years. But he walked into the studio on day 2 and saw all of those guys in that space, and he was like, "What is going on here? Where did these guys come from? How did you find this? And are they all from St. Louis?" And so I kind of explained that no, they relocated here for a very brief time so that they could just explore dance in a way that maybe they haven't before. So it was a really rewarding experience, not only for me, I got to know the guys really well, and but I think it was great for them to connect in that way too.
Wow, talk about vulnerability. I mean, you were asking that of them in a really big way. I think this is very cool. And I love that you said, of course, it would pay off in the way they're moving on the field. Like, it would be impossible for it not to have, right?
Absolutely.
So do you find that that gives them more confidence, not only in their ability to move, but also in their just performance?
100%. I mean, I definitely recognize as a color guard performer myself, before I got into dance training, I always felt as though I was really confident when I had equipment in my hands. When I had that prop and I was moving it around and I had something to do with my hands, I felt like I could move forward with confidence. But as soon as you took that away, you kind of feel, again, vulnerable. It's that moment of like, I don't know what to do. But I think that they really gain that confidence throughout the experience. They actually have a dance feature in the fourth movement of their show, and I think that that really highlights a lot of those skills that we introduced back in May. It's really translating to the field now.
Very cool. Thank you for explaining all that. What a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for those members of the Corps and for us all to be able to enjoy the fruits of those labors. It's very cool. So you guys, of course, work with Michael Cesario and Fred J. Miller Company, and they're great costuming again for you guys. I would like to hear a little bit about we see the armor and then we see them come out and they're clearly softened, right? And like, I would love to hear a little bit about the thought process behind what they sort of become and make sure I understand exactly what that's supposed to mean. I think it's pretty clear, but I want to make sure I understand it.
Well, there's really 3 stages to it, and the uniform, obviously, the idea was if you took a Cavalier uniform and hit it with metal and froze them, metallicized them, that's how we wanted to come out looking. Everything is in black and silver, frozen, stuck. They just became soldiers in a way. But then there's a panel on the left chest that reveals itself, and there's this beautiful red underneath the panel. So that's the first time we show the halfway point before the metamorphosis of, this is where I am guarded. I'm going to show you a little bit of myself, but I'm afraid to go there all the way. And then you start to see layers of uniforms leaving at different points in the third portion of the show. What Mason Daphne did, our drill writer, that was just absolutely brilliant, was created an every other person effect when we're doing the jazz ballad, You've Changed. And that's how this thing starts. And it's tongue in cheek, but at the same time, it's this want to look at yourself and say, yes, you have changed, and it's okay, you've changed. But then from that point, you start hearing Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror inside of You've Changed. And then at some point, you get both of those happening. And the company front that happens in the third segment of the show is Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, but you see the old and the new side by side, 20 to 20. And that's really where the first time, and I love hearing judges' reactions when we get to that point, because it's always like, you're showing both people right now. You're stuck in between, do I go or do I not? And I said to a judge the other night, it's James Earl Jones walking into the cornfield in Field of Dreams. That little ha-ha laugh before he takes that step. It's like, because if I go here, there's no coming back, and I think it's powerful. Visually, it's powerful to see that. And then obviously after that, everybody loses their armor and it becomes all about being yourself. And the idea and the arc of the show is from guarded to questioning yourself to complete reveal, and you become your biggest hero. The Evanescence tune that we're doing is the final production, Bring Me to Life. It's all about that, and when it's so cool to step back and watch when people start realizing that you're playing Evanescence, and they're like, oh, that's, and then the Bring Me to Life piece, and everybody's revealed at that point. It's like, take the shackles off and let me be who it is I wanted to be all along. Whatever that interpretation of that might be for the audience member, whether it's, shy to talkative, whether it's, intellectual to emotional, whatever that might be. But it's that complete reveal and that shedding of the armor. It had to be that way with the uniform. Now, the blue-green came from a couple things. Blue is obviously a soft color. It's predominant male. I guess you would say that blue is equated with male some, but the green had to be a Cavaliers thing. Michael Cesario just insisted. He said, "You are not going to do a reveal and not have green." And I'm like, "I trust you. I got that." So it's Adam's idea to go more iridescent with it. So it's an iridescent digital print that it almost blends the blue-green family, that creates that look in the tunic that we have once that drops off the top. So Adam, you want to continue on that? Oh, can I say one more thing? The hat. This goes back to last year. I announced that we were going back to the Cavalier uniform and put the hat on. It was the biggest reaction from the entire drum corps. They were so excited to wear the hat. And so we have to start with the hat, metallicized, and we lose the hat. And I'm already getting questions for next year. Just tell me we're going to wear the hat again next year. We want to wear the hat. That's a big deal to them. And it's iconic to the Cavalier uniform. But the fact that we chose to do that, and there's not a lot of drum corps using headwear this year, I think that's special and keeps that tradition alive in year 76. Mm-hmm. Adam, sorry.
No. And it's thematic. It connects to where we are conceptually, through costuming. So I think, when we shed those layers too, that iridescent color palette, there's some layers that are going to be going into. We have some things that are going to be coming in as we finish the season 2, costume-wise too, to really connect everything together with the color guard and the musicians.
Yeah, it's really striking. I'm a big fan of hats. So I'm very, very happy that you're wearing hats at any point, and I think hats look great on the field. So every time I'm talking to somebody and they're using hats, I have to make sure and say thank you. And I think it's awesome. And of course, it's a great tool to shed that, and make yourself vulnerable. Like it's right on concept to do that, clearly. Yeah, it's very cool. All right, I know much more about all this now than I did, and I appreciate it all. I feel like you've described a show that is really challenging to the audience and to the performers in a way that I appreciate. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you talked about this show never stops, all this horizontal. I mean, and I just keep thinking, so nobody really ever gets to like you're asking them to just, they're on, right? That is very, very demanding what you're asking of those performers, and then asking them to be vulnerable in so many different ways on and off the performance field, I think is great. But also, it's a big ask, and so I feel like it's great. Like let's challenge ourselves. Let's have these young men grow, and I think it's wonderful you're doing it. Brandon, we've been talking about vulnerability this whole time, and how in our culture, how people are reacting to that. I do think it's a very interesting moment in time for you guys to be talking about being vulnerable, because I feel like the world is clamoring for us to be more authentic and vulnerable. And of course, that also means that we're all experiencing that pushback all around us, as people are very uncomfortable, and, you have to be uncomfortable to grow. But I think it's interesting, that there's going to be that push and pull just because you're approaching this topic.
100%. I think on a personal level, one of the hardest things that we do as humans is make eye contact with each other. It's really easy to pass someone on the street and not even look at them at all. And so I think that some of the level of maybe hesitation in terms of making eye contact on a human level is something that makes this show come to life a little bit. It's that uncomfortable feeling of like, these props have turned and these faces are looking at me, and I feel a little bit uneasy right now. But the question internally is it because you're making eye contact with someone, and it's not something we're all used to, especially with technology continuing to evolve the way that it does. We communicate more on a virtual level than we do on a human level from a day-to-day perspective. And so I think that's something that's really important to identify, that we're losing that connection from person to person by just simply making eye contact with each other.
Yeah, that's really quite profound. And I do think that's why, just even watching the show on video, I was so struck by those very strong, bold faces just looking right at me. And I'm like, okay, wow, like this, it's very powerful stuff. Oh.
Well, and I think a drum corps performer comes into a season wanting to know about the what and the how. And I think we've taken this to the asking the question why, and that's the intangible, the what and the music and how the performance. I mean, those are things that you can evaluate, but that why is something you pull out of the air, and it's a different why, I think, for every single performer. And I think from every single segment of the drum corps, it might be a different why for the horn members than it is for the color guard, than it is for the percussion, than it is for the staff. I think all of us are kind of reaching deep on this one. And again, I love what Brandon just said about looking at people in the eye. I intentionally walk down the street or in the grocery store or wherever I am, and I say good morning to somebody or hello, how are you? And 9 times out of 10, they're shocked that there's another human being speaking to them. And I think that's that vulnerability piece that, I wish our society would get back to being okay with being spoken to by a stranger, know that it's going to be okay, and I think that's where we're introducing this concept of vulnerability and to let a stranger being the audience every night, being our friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm going to ask each of you to sort of say one thing to wrap up the conversation. It can be a recap of something that you've said, something you want to say about the show or the season before we're closing. I do want to say, David, to what you're saying, my favorite place to implement that is checking out of the grocery store and acknowledging and making eye contact just with the person, doing like they're shocked if you're nice to them and you actually look at them. And that's like my favorite, and thanking the person that's bagging your groceries if you're in that. It's like, I love that moment because I feel like they're not treated very kindly or even like they're there so much of the time. People are so distracted. So that's one example from my life that I really cherish is making sure that I'm aware to do that when possible. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, Adam, I'm going to let you go first. What would you like to say in wrapping up the conversation?
It's been a great opportunity to come back to the drum corps and work with this team of designers and the members. It's exciting to be able to look back, to be able to move forward. And what's been really fantastic about the project is it's always living, it's moving, and we're figuring. And it's really exciting. I'm really excited to see how they progress in the next few weeks. It's been a great team of people to be with.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like this is one of those shows that everybody should really pay attention to as it develops through the end of the season. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. Brandon, what would you like to say as we're closing?
I mean, the last thing I'll leave you with, and the audience as well, is a simple invitation to go on this journey with us through these last 3 weeks of the season. Like we mentioned earlier in our conversation, it's an evolutionary process that is the creative process, and be open to that evolution and stay tuned for all of the updates that are to come over the next 3 weeks. There's still a lot of exciting stuff on the table, and I think that it'll continue to draw audiences in as we progress to August.
Yeah, no doubt about it. David, what would you say?
I think as I'm sitting here thinking about this tonight, Jay Webb was one of my instructors at Star of Indiana back in the day, and he just retired as director of bands at Avon. And I remember Jay telling us, we were a second-year drum corps at the time, and he said, drum corps will take you through every experience, every emotion, and every opportunity or failure that you might ever experience in life. And I think that is vulnerability in a nutshell, and I think we're teaching these guys way more than just, performance and notes. We're teaching them how to be better people. And at the root of it all, this show is really about finding the best version of yourself. And if there's anything a member walks away from this year, I want them to say, I found myself, I found a better version of myself, and I can't wait to apply that to real life when I get back.
I love that. Well, guys, thank you for the great work you're doing with the Corps. Thank you for taking time to talk with me and share all of this. And it's a very, very cool show, and it's going to be really exciting to watch it develop and grow and finish the season. Everybody go out there, buy your Cavies t-shirt, support the Corps, go see Drum Corps Live if you can. David, Adam, and Brandon, thank you for talking to me.
Oh, thank
you, Tim.
Thank you.
Marching Arts Education is the home of the Marching Roundtable podcast. We give you access to the top marching arts professionals through live webinars, podcasts, videos, interviews, and online coursework. With over 1,000 podcasts and hundreds of webinars and videos, there are hours of great professional development for you and your staff. Sign up for a membership to Marching Arts Education to get complete access to all webinars, videos, and podcasts, plus discounts on coursework. Many directors are using professional development funds through their school or boosters to make these resources available to their staff. Imagine what you could do with so many great new ideas from the top professionals in our activity. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to find out about the latest podcasts, webinars, and new content. Find all of this and sign up at marchingartseducation.com.